Well, good morning, everybody. We have a exciting session planned for you in the next 40 minutes. Let me just tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. So, obviously the theme, we've talked, so much about disruption. We've talked so much about changes in the workforce, automation, disruptions in business models. What we're really talking about in this session is what does it mean for leaders in terms of change, and specifically from the C-suite. What does it look like from the top? What are they concerned about, and how are we thinking about how this needs to pervade the organization? So we have three fantastic panelists. Let me get to it and introduce them. So you know their names, but let me tell you a little bit about them. So first up, as you know, is the former chairman of Shell companies in Singapore. She was actually the first woman to earn a role that high in the company. She also serves on the boards of Capital Land, Singapore Airlines, Singapore University of Technology and Design, among others. And she's also the chairperson of the Institute of HR Professionals. Please welcome Swee Chen. Now, second panelist is Senior Vice President and General Manager for VMware's business in Asia Pacific and Japan. Prior to that, he led IBM's software business in Asia Pacific, which actually came to be through the acquisition of Lotus. How many of you remember Lotus? We have some in the audience who know Lotus. The others actually have no idea, but I remember Lotus 1, 2, 3. So please welcome Duncan Hewett. And our third panelist is Group CFO Kanmo Group. He's just flown in from Indonesia. Now, Kanmo Group, you may not be familiar with Kanmo, but I'm sure you know many of the brands that they represent, including Coach. Anybody knows Coach? Kate Spade, Mothercare, Nespresso. Okay, a lot of household names there. Please welcome Niraj, Jain. Okay, John Chambers, Executive Chairman of Cisco. He once said, at least 40% of all businesses will die in the next 10 years if they don't figure out how to change their entire company to accommodate new technologies. 40%. That means that in this room, out of 10 people, 4 out of 10 of those businesses are no longer going to exist. That's pretty sobering, right? And if you look at the actual data and how companies have been forming and dying and look at who's represented on the stock exchanges, you actually see that happening. So we're going to start with a big picture with our panelists. And I'm going to ask about how technology disruption is changing the workplace. So let me start with Duncan. What aspects of technology disruption in the workplace are you most excited about? Let's start with the upside.
So I think the first thing is we're seeing technology embed in every part of the business, whether it's on the retail side, whether it's on the enterprise side, how to manage people, and how to help, I guess, people succeed. And so what's exciting for someone who's in the technology industry is it's actually a critical element for every business that we deal with.
So technology matters regardless what business you're in, and it touches every single thing that happens in the organization.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is we're also now starting to see, big societal issues like unbanked. We have actually an opportunity through, a mobile phone and technology to actually make them a bit able to participate in society, with a bank account, with provision of government funds. So it really is changing the way society works.
So lots of opportunities, but are there any downsides? Swee Chen, what aspects of disruption concern you the most?
So Ian, I think you know I'm a worrier. That's why you asked me the question. Where people talk about books and read books on opportunities, I read books about what should you be worried about. And it's as in everything, there's always two sides of a coin. For every concerns that you have, opportunities will arise. And I just want to talk about 3 things. First, in 2005, Thomas Friedman released this book, and he calls it The World is Flat. And at that time, they discussed the availability of personal computers and high-speed fiber networks, and how that distributes and gives the opportunity to distribute work. And therefore, you don't have to be geography bound when you consider work that needs to be done. So that's one phenomena and one trend that we've been seeing. And then the second one is this 24-hour news cycle and social media. Everyone all of a sudden became a journalist. Anything that you do within seconds will reach to the furthest reach of the world. And therefore, from a leadership perspective, in terms of managing reputation, it is no longer confined to broadsheets or certain media. It is anybody, anywhere could release news, could provide opinion. Everyone is a journalist. And then the last one is this one about knowledge. Knowledge is power. How often when you're stuck with an answer for a question, you thought, I'm going to Google this, I'm going to Wikipedia this, and you get the answer. And when knowledge becomes power, the power then tends to shift. It tends to shift from those who have access to this knowledge and the learned and the thought leaders. And that power then shifts to the everyday consumer, it shifts to the everyday employee. And I think all these are trends that we've been seeing over the past several decades that would change the way leadership needs to work, companies need to think, and employees needs to behave, and employees needs to contribute in order for us to make a success out of this world that we're in today.
So everything does indeed have two sides, and I'm going to ask Niraj to weigh in here about, are there some areas in terms of disruption in the workforce that you think the jury's still out? Because actually, Duncan talked about, unbanked, it's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. Swee talked about, having information available, but it's also a challenge, right? So what in your mind is, jury's still out?
I think they have covered the most of it, but when I look at it, I think something that is that's not yet covered is how a modern customer and a modern employee react. If you look at the real threat and opportunity in technology disruption, actually it lies in the evolution of customer and employees as well. The employees now, especially the millennials, they expect more convenience, they expect smarter ways to work, and they are continuously looking for change, and we as the C-suite leader needs to drive them to enable those changes and work smarter.
But I think one of the things that, the technology being on 24/7, to Swee Chen's point, it is actually creating a new challenge. And I guess one of the things that's happening across the marketplace, Japan's announced work style innovation. So how to manage basically balance of work and life, because they have a genuine problem of people working 24/7. So, it's both good and bad.
Absolutely.
So it's great that you have access 24 hours, but because of that, you may end up working 24 hours, as some in Japan have done. And there have been a few deaths.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of where technology's created a problem around making information available, making the ability for someone to actually work all the time. And it means us as leaders need to think through actually when we send information. I know some of the Scandinavian countries have talked about managers not allowed to send an email on a weekend. So they've actually got to hold off till Monday before they communicate.
I think to elaborate it further, I can share with you some example that happens in our side of the business, wherein we are more consumer or customer facing with brands like Mothercare. So at times you do not have the luxury to go to office at 9 a.m. in the morning and react to a customer response. We do have online presence of mothers who call themselves as the 2 a.m. Mothers Club, and at times if you are not reacting to it early morning or at 5 o'clock in the morning, you could see that there is a lot that has happened overnight. So you need to be reacting really, really fast.
So the business cycle is changing, which means that employees are changing, which means that leaders are changing. Love to get your take then on how leadership has changed. And specifically, if you could share any anecdote around how life as a leader today has changed vis-a-vis 5, 10 years ago. What are the things that you're doing differently or that you expect your leaders to do differently?
Leaders now need to now need to embrace change themselves, and then they need to foster a culture of change in the organization so that they can get their teams to actually accept changes. If I look at 5 years, back, say coming in from a strategy perspective, we used to frame a strategy and we used to work on it for the next 3-4 years. But that is no longer a reality. In the current scenario, you can make a strategy. Yes, you do make a 5-year-long strategy, but you need to continue to amend it again and again, depending on what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening around you. So you cannot just stay with one strategy that you have framed and say that I'm not going to change it. You need to adapt to change regularly.
Yeah, and I think the other piece that's happened in that is how people communicate. So I now have millennials who actually have no fear of me. So you have someone who's, in an entry-level role, inside sales rep, who's then booking my time and asking for career advice. It's like, you've been in the organisation 9 months. Why are you already looking for the next change? But they're looking for an organisation that's engaged, that's going to deliver a value proposition that will keep them interested, or they're going to leave. And so for us, what's changed is that whole engagement with staff. In the last 10 years, it's gone from, I will send an email out to my managers and it'll filter down, where I have to be much more conscious about how I communicate down through the organisation and actually make myself available.
Chen?
Yeah, perhaps I should focus on two things. One, just in terms of from a leadership perspective, technology does offer opportunities, and you constantly have to look at different ways that you can continue to tweak or even change the nature of your business in order to leverage the opportunities that technology has to offer. And I just, so I was introduced as a former chairman of Shell companies here in Singapore. I left Shell, I retired end of January this year. So fresh off the top of my head are just some examples on how technology can become an opportunity when we really enable it throughout the organization. And I just want to talk a little bit about the evolution of Shell in terms of how it constantly look for technology in order to drive up business value. So, in the old days, we're 128 years now in Singapore. When Shell first started, it was as an oil company. And it was oil to transport, at that time, exotic collections from the Borneo Islands all the way to Europe. And that's how the oil industry, and then later, together with the combination with Royal Dutch Petroleum, we became Royal Dutch Shell, solely focused on oil. And then as we looked at the world and the landscape, and the world continued to need more energy sources, they are harder and harder to find, and also with climate change challenges, the transition then was made to invest more in gas. So Shell then became oil and gas. If you look at our strategy today, or Shell's strategy, I should say, it's very focused on being an energy solutions company. And an energy solutions company then looks at the full suite of the opportunities that exist in the provision and the access to energy from all parts of the world, from the richest part of the world to the poorest part of the world. And it is amazing how technology can be used to really penetrate energy access in some of the poorest part of the world, which is an ambition that Shell wants to have. Then, so technology as an opportunity, and how as a leader you need to continue to broaden your mind in not staying with your conventional line of business, but really rethinking And I would bet 5 years from now, it's going to be extremely difficult to say, you know, I'm in the oil and gas sector, you're in the power sector, or you're in the manufacturing sector. Those lines will be blurred because of technology. The second one I want to talk about is leadership and individuals. So looking for the type of people that you hire. And I think more and more so, because of advancement in technology, because of the availability of the knowledge base, the attitude of the employee is going to be a lot more important than the actual competency, because you assume if the individual can absorb, can learn new things, that knowledge can be gathered, but attitude is a lot harder to develop.
So if I sort of take the opportunity to sort of pull together a few themes that we were just talking about, I think the one that comes through is the pace of change. So very fast paced, leaders must be able to move very, very quickly, adapt their strategies as the environment changes. Number two, the way of leading and the way of engaging is different. Duncan, you talked about, you know, basically reduced hierarchy and new engagement models. You know, Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, once said, you know, anyone should be able to tell me anything. That's the culture that we were striving for. And I think that's the expectation from increasingly large part of the workforce. So I think you illustrated that.
Yeah, and I think this is where, if you look at the pace of change, both in terms of opportunity and challenge, take someone like Reliance Geo in India. They're a telecommunications provider, so that's a pretty consistent business that's been around, supplying mobile phones to individuals. But they've gone from 0 to 240 million consumers in 2.5 years. Now, to do that, you need to connect the business together. It's not just at a C-suite making decisions, we're going to go after business. You actually need the innovation of people. So you end up creating virtual teams, and the business and IT has to be connected together. Because I think one of the challenges we had even 5 years ago was a concept of the business would create a project scope, they would throw it over the fence to IT, IT would then build it and then throw it back. Now that didn't work very well, because when they threw it back, it very rarely actually matched what the business originally wanted. So that piece around being able to come together, and you hear the word agile, but it really is about bringing people together and being able to bring them together for a project and then move forward onto the next project. So you have to be much more, I guess, creative around how to link people up and down the organization.
Which is a fabulous segue into the next question. I mean, we've just been talking about how being a leader has changed. So, you know, you need to hire differently. Chen talked about that. You need to move fast. You know, let's talk a little bit about what kind of competencies, digital or otherwise, you think are important for leaders to have in their toolkit in this environment. Maybe, I mean, it's a very long list. Maybe I just ask each one to talk about 3 key competencies that you think are critical for leaders in this environment. Niraj, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So if I think of 3 key leadership skills that we see in the current age leaders, I think the first and foremost is a willingness to change, to learn and unlearn. So even to pick up on Duncan's point of hiring now, we no longer look at people who had a past experience, because that might not be relevant for future. You have to look at people who are willing to get new experience, and the new experience is by learning new things. So I think willing to learn and change is very, very important. The second key parameter or the key skill set would be how do they broaden their horizon. So as a CFO, I cannot say that I'm handling finance or I'm handling just business, but I would not look at the HR aspect of it. So it is more on business partnering and looking at the 360 of the business rather than just focusing on one side of it, including technology. So it cannot be any more that, okay, that's the IT side of the business and let the IT team do it. You need to be hands-on with everything and make it happen. I think those would be the 3 key things from me.
Maybe Chen, what do you think? 3 competencies that you think are most critical in this digital age for leaders?
I think the first one is to get tech savvy. If you can't use Twitter or Instagram, learn how to do it, and make sure that you make use of all the mechanisms that is available in order to convey what you represent as a leader, how you want to drive the organization, and all those things. And then the second one is, I agree completely with Niraj around, you can no longer be that reclusive, dynamic, single, charismatic leader. That doesn't work anymore. You have to be that inclusive leader. You have to be able to reach out to people who are like you and people who are not like you, from those in your organization, from outside of the organization, in order for you to foster, be it innovation, ideas, or ways to resolve some of the most complex problems that the world has to offer. And the last one is, it's something that oftentimes we don't pay enough attention to, which is really your own personal well-being, your own mental health, your own fitness. The pace is grueling, and we all talked about how fast things move. When I was with Shell, I wake up every day not knowing, that inevitably from one part of the world something will be happening and it would impact the business that I was in. And you juggle so many balls all at one go. So you really got to take care of yourself, your own mental fitness, your own physical fitness. And I would say those would be the three things.
Thought-provoking list. Duncan.
Yeah, can I just add one more? I think you have to be into the three. They did such a great job. You have to be intellectually curious. So you're looking for people that are looking out and asking questions and comfortable that they don't know the answers. I mean, in this age, we are seeing disruptors make massive change. And you only need to look at, the market cap of the top 10 companies 10 years ago to the market cap of the top 10 companies today. And it'll be different in another 10 years. But that intellectual curiosity, and I guess the other thing that I guess I've noticed we're hiring much for is people who are humble. People who realise that actually they don't know everything, and they're willing to engage across a much broader spectrum of people to gain both knowledge and access to innovation.
What's interesting is that none of you talked about specific technical domain expertise. You didn't say, this person needs to know.
And I'm the techie on the...
And you exactly. So you're talking about, you talk about being digitally savvy, technologically savvy, but you're not talking about, I need to know this industry, or I need to know this domain or this function, this specialization. You're really talking about the ability to work in a very changing environment and where you don't know the answers.
Yeah, though it's interesting, and I guess this is the piece around innovation. I was sitting in one of the banks in Australia at the end of last year, just before the financial regulator was handing down a report with 73 recommendations. And the discussion we were having was actually around how to manage a certification process. So how do you gather every consumer banking employee and get them to certify that the work they'd done in the prior quarter didn't involve any poor transactions or things that might violate a code of conduct? And how do you gather that on an ongoing basis? Part of as a technology company is we have to show people what we can do. And the joy of a mobile phone, and some of you may curse it as well, is that it's an available technology that we can actually use for every single employee and make that sort of process easy.
I want to then move to the role that HR can play in helping organizations transform. clearly one of the things that we talked about is, as a business leader, you're no longer just looking at a particular functional area. You're actually having a very holistic perspective. You're looking inside and outside the organization. You're trying to be inclusive, so on. If you had a magic wand, right, and you could sort of say, I want to magically get HR to start doing something, to stop doing something, or to improve what they're doing in order to support this transformation, what would that be? Duncan, I'll give you the wand first.
So I guess the first thing is I probably talk to my HR leader, if not once a day, sometimes twice a day. So the thing I've noticed is the rate of change and the engagement level has actually gone up, because it's no longer the operational management of HR functions. It's actually around the health and well-being of my organisation. And that health and well-being has got so many different facets to it. Actually, things like the mental health of leaders that are under pressure is not a discussion I would have had with HR 5 years ago. It's actually something I regularly cover around where are we at with our leaders, where are we actually stretching them beyond something that's then going to cause a problem. And it's not just about what their work life, home life, it's actually about the whole person and how they engage. So that's one of the things I really value.
So is this something that you would like HR to start doing or stop doing or to maybe do more of? It sounds like continue to do more of that engaging of the whole person?
Yeah, the piece that I guess we're seeing HR transform is that the thought pattern around how do we create situations or environments to help people succeed. And at the end of the day, all organisations are dependent on the people they have. So what I am looking for HR is to find me new ways to access people or create situations that allow people to talk, allow people to surface issues so they don't get hidden. Because I just don't have time for something to stay hidden and then come as a surprise.
Swee Chen, what would you like to see more of HR? And of course, you have a broad perspective from across the HR profession broadly. But yeah, so either across the profession or perhaps in your experience, start, stop, or improve.
If I may mention two things. One is just relook the way we recruit. A lot of times when we recruit, we go out and we look for individuals who could fill the position that is vacant, and that's quite a short-term view, and just put a little bit more emphasis on really assessing the attitude of the individual. There were studies done from the past that says, the one thing that stood out in those who could succeed amidst chaos and changes and all those is grit, that grit power. And how do you define that? How do you look for that in individuals that you're recruiting? So when you're recruiting, think longer term, put a bit more emphasis on attitude. Of course, competency is important. Otherwise, difficult to get the job done at the get-go. But do place that emphasis on attitude. Then the second thing I wanted to talk about, and many of you would have heard the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it is so true especially in this day and age. And I just as an example, I think leaders just need to almost have this change of mindset, change of paradigm in the way you look at businesses. And I want to just talk about an example when I was running the lubricants business. I was in China, and in one of the meetings I said, could someone tell me what the sales volume was year to date? And this lady who was in charge of the business sort of looked at me for a long time, and she said, do you want it month to date? Do you want it week to date? Or do you want it right now? The sales volume numbers right now. And she could give me the sales volume number right at that point in time when I was asking. And this is the magic of technology. And so as a leader, we talk about how pace has changed, and it has changed so tremendously. You no longer look at month-to-date data. You look at data right at that point in time, which takes me to this point that I'm making around the paradigm shift. As leaders, we've in the past have been trained to think of solutions and get them as perfect as possible before you roll them out. But that's no longer the case. We just before I left Shell, we were going through these lean startup that looks at how you develop solutions that meets the minimum viable proposition. It doesn't have to be perfect. You talk about Scrum application development. It is not perfect. You rolled out what is minimally required, and then you constantly adjust and you constantly improve from there. So this mindset of not right first time, it's something that is, I think we need to think about how do we get that right balance of pushing something out when it's just about right, but it's not perfect. And I think HR can play a role in just rethinking how we develop our employees of the future in terms of like thinking about less than perfect is okay. Sloppy job is of course not okay, but less than perfect, just enough to go. And then that spirit of constantly renewing, constantly improving.
But then there are a lot of implications for performance management, right, in that respect, because we think about how KPIs are set and how we typically expect people to hit their KPIs, which of course is quite counter to, I think, what you just were describing. Of course, you want performance, but you're not saying you have to, get to that point. Niraj, I know you've been doing some interesting stuff.
So
What do you expect from HR? Yeah.
So from HR, I think I've heard both of them, but I have a little different approach on HR. I feel HR in the modern age, they need to be leveraging technology. So Duncan, to your points, say for us at Kanmo, what we do is we get the NPS score by employees, and that is very, very frequent. And I know exactly what's the feedback that we are getting from customer. Actually, this morning when I came in, I was interested in one of the stalls which is outside by I think Hono HR, wherein they had something which is relating to employee engagement and how, as a company, you can get into NPS score by employees and frame an action plan basis that. Another example of, again, all of us do acknowledge that training and development and learning is very critical for any organization. For us, with 1,700 staffs who are on the floor shops of various stores, it is critical that we engage with them and we get them to get interested into training. So something that we are doing with HR is gamifying the entire training module. So basically what happens for us is the employees, either they are in a classroom training or they are in a discussion or they are in an online training. At the end of the training, the trainer actually gives them some coins. And we call it as Kanmo coins. Kanmo group being our group name. So the employees get those coins for attending a training module. What they can do is, again, leveraging technology. They can say, if they are doing online training, they can record their learning and they can post it on the site, and the trainer just evaluates and gives them score and Kanmo coins. Now, this Kanmo coins, they can use it if they accumulate more than 100 points, they get X amount added to their salary, which is a very small amount, but if they accumulate more than that, they can get a free trip to somewhere, or they can redeem it for some products from the store or something like that. But the entire gamification of the training module has actually made the staff much more engaged, and now they themselves want to go into training, and they are more excited to get into it rather than just, oh, my boss has recommended me for a training and I have to go again and get trained, and I will not be able to achieve sales and my target will not be hit. So the entire mindset has shifted. So how does HR leverage technology? And something that I would like to share here, and I once heard Niraj Chaudhary say, it is no longer about innovation. It is about immovation. So basically what you do is, somebody has done something, you copy it, you imitate it, you take it to the next level. So it's not that you have to start everything from scratch. You can copy something good that someone has done, imitate it, improve it, and innovate it. So I think that's what I expect from HR, to continuously innovate and make it better and better.
And clearly, HR needs to be comfortable with leveraging technology, analytics. I think that's something that you're asking for. You know, why? And actually, Duncan, you started with this. You know, technology pervasive throughout the organization, including for HR. You got to leverage those tools. You know, we've covered a lot of ground here. I'm just going to take a minute to summarize some of the points that we talked about. I'm sure you've taken your own notes. You know, but I think clearly one of the things is around the pace of change, which requires that leaders lead in a different way, much more engaging manner, be able to actually drive culture. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about culture, which brings me to summing up the points around HR. I think number one, it's about creating the environment that allows people to succeed, right? So we're talking about how can HR work with the business leaders to create that kind of rapid environment, one where less than perfect is okay. We also talked about changing the way we recruit. And I think it's recruitment, but it's also things like the way we think about HR broadly. It could be changes in policies, changes in performance, because you're no longer hiring for the job today. You're hiring for how the job is going to change in 12, 24, 36 months. So looking very differently at capabilities. And then lastly, making sure that HR is fundamentally comfortable with technology, which is why you're all here, right? You're here at TechHR because you're interested to learn about how technology can infuse HR. I'm just going to end with a very quick rapid fire with the last few seconds that we have with our panelists. So you just pick one or the other. Okay, Android or iOS?
iOS.
iOS.
For sure, iOS.
Okay, Facebook or Instagram?
Facebook.
Instagram.
Instagram.
Okay, 2 to 1. Business leadership, are you looking for generalists or specialists?
Both.
Okay.
Both too.
I cannot say anything else now.
Right.
To be bold.
And then the last thing, we talked so much about how leadership needs to change. When you think about, and also how you hire differently, when you think about leadership in a digital age, nature or nurture?
I'm at your nurture.
Nurture.
Both.
Hire for nature and nurture them.
Okay, all right. So I'm just going to end with a very interesting quote that George Westerman, he's a research scientist at MIT, and he said something that I think is something worth reflecting on. He said, when digital transformation is done right, it's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. But when done wrong, all you have is a really fast caterpillar. On that note, please join me in thanking our panelists, Duncan, Swee, Chen, and Niraj. Thank you for having us.